Hello, and welcome to Research with Karen. Today I'm checking out a Marxist convention where the presenter discusses eventually the dates in which the rainbow and the socialists hook up.
Well, the first thing to say, I'll get my apologies in quickly, is that this meeting's had to be slightly radically changed in that this was going to be a dialogue between me and Andy Ridley. Andy Ridley is not here. He couldn't make it. He's had to work. And what the intention had been is I would talk and he would independently research photographs, and there could be a dialogue between his doing research on photographs and me commenting on them. And the other thing that was... that obviously can't happen now. There will be photographs of which I've not seen half of them, but they'll be going on a loop rather than him commenting what I have to say by showing a picture, and him choosing what they would be. The second thing that he suggested was that, as he pointed out to me rather briskly, that where most people have to read the history of queer theory, you'd have to remember it. In the fact that I was there before queer theory was invented. First gay pride was in 1974. I went to. The idea of queer politics was invented in 1990. So I've seen it before, I've seen it come, I've seen it go, I've seen it come again. Other people call it history, I call it remembering. So he wanted it to be a sort of me reminiscing about the various movements at various times and what I'd seen myself as a sort of witness to history. So, that's the apologies. Let's start, but I'll start with, before we start on the loop, I want to look at this photograph, because I'm going to talk about the history of queer politics and queer theory, and it's down as twice. I think they're two different things, and in some way an antagonism against each other, right from 1990. Queer politics and queer theory have not been as one, and have sometimes been quite hostile to each other. But this is, I want to look at the politics of what was before the gay liberation movement and gay liberation politics. This is a picture of the Stonewall Bar that many people kicked off the entire movement, or the riot there. And it's a good picture because it shows you the typical clientele of the Stonewall. And you'll see that they're young, they're mostly black or Latino, and they're basically street youth. The thing about the early gay movement was street youth. It was not a particularly, in fact, it was not a majority white movement at all. And if you look at all photographs and activists of that time, you'll see the ethnic diversity, a predominance really, of Latino and black activists. And if you want to get a flavour, a taste of what the politics of that time were, I'm going to criticise some of their politics in a minute, but there were many good things to say about them, which other meetings often concentrate on because of what came later. They were revolutionary, they wanted a complete transformation of society, they identified with the other movements of the time, etc., etc. But there's a documentary on the life of Marsha P. Johnson, which is available on YouTube, who's one of the leaders of that movement. I'd recommend you to watch that. It really gives you the flavour of what that period was like. But having said all those good things about the GLF, there was also some weaknesses in it, which I think wasn't, I mean, the major thing to say, it collapsed because the whole of the movement's collapsed. It wasn't just on its own. The whole, I suppose you call it 68 project of revolution and change of the black movement, anti-war movement in Europe, the working class on the high rise of strikes and mass strikes challenging the state, all those sort of things collapsed. And with it collapsed, Gay Liberation Front. But there were problems with the gay politics, even from early on. And if you look at some of their early writings, and I've chosen, partly at random, partly because it's a particular irritant of mine, Don Milligan, writing in 1973 in a pamphlet from the Edinburgh Gay Activist Alliance reprint. And you'll see that he represents quite clearly the sort of politics there was at that period. And the politics at GLF, apart from being revolutionary, wanted a new society, they believed in living the revolution. So most people lived in communes, a new way of living. So you lived in squats and communes, was very much part of the movement. The family, they're very much anti-family. I mean, South London Gay Centre picketed weddings and things. They saw the family as a bastion of society that should be attacked. And they thought that it was the main ideological underpinning of capitalism, the system, in a very naive, I'm not saying this is wrong in principle, but in a very direct, simplistic way, they believed that. And so if you look at some of their writings, for example, How Wrong Can You Be? This is Don Milligan in 1973, talking about marriage. Even when homosexuals do marry each other, they unwittingly turn marriage into a charade. Gay marriages performed, because there were marriages even then, are a grisly parody of heterosexual ceremonies. Far from making homosexual acceptable, they demonstrate the absurdity of marriage and challenge the assumptions that the institution rests upon. Well, that's clearly been completely not the case. There's been a complete normalization of marriage to gays, it's now acceptable, etc., etc. So their idea that just by being gay, you can, by wearing a frock, society falls over, it proved not to be the case. There are also beliefs in radical drag. And I think that partly comes from the fact that the process of coming out makes the politics of LGBT that from the start very personalised, and therefore the drag of identity politics, of personal politics, has always been very strong within the gay movement. I mean, all movements are an analysis of different classes, but within the gay movement it's very obvious very early on that from GLF you got the Gay Activist Alliance in New York. The respectable middle-class reformers took over very, very early on. And some of them, even by 1971, 72, they were banning certain people on the gay pride demonstration because they weren't respectable enough. They were giving them a bad name. The drag queens and were not viewed as being good for the image of the respectable gay movement fighting within for equalisation, for equality. When you see GLF coming to Britain, it had to adapt its ideas because unlike in America, it was very obvious that one of the powers that could change society was the working class. So in America, there was very little contact between the GLF and the workers' movement. There was contact between the Panthers and the civil rights and the feminist movement, but not between the organised working class. When it came to Britain, again you see it in the ideas at the time, it was clear that the group that had the power to change society was the working class. So very early on, the GLF allied it to, went on demonstrations during the strikes of 72, 74, GLF would turn up to them. In fact, I remember when the Pentonville fire, that was dockers that were put in prison in Pentonville, and which triggered almost spontaneous general strike, which really threatened the government. The only people to bring a banner was Gay Liberation Front. So you got a bizarre sign of this banner with sort of 10,000 workers behind it, which was not a representation of the movement at that time. The idea in Britain always was to relate to the working class and try and educate the working class and link in with worker struggles. Not always welcome but open arms, it must be said. But that's the orientation, even then, of gay liberation in this country. But even earlier on, when I was first involved, 74, 75, 76, there was an argument within the gay movement. And again, this is something that's been common to the gay movement from day one. Because of the rejection of the history of Stalinism, the way the gay movement organised was always in a non-hierarchical way. That is, people would meet till you got a consensus in the people involved. The problem with that is, of course, those who can stay longer and talk longest and talk most things tend to dominate. It's always been dominated by personalities because there's very little democracy in that sort of structure. Those that can argue on and on and on and on, and you would see that again and again occurring inside all the movements, actually. They appear to be very open and democratic. It's like it works the opposite way round. There's no way of shutting somebody up so keep them happy. You go along with their ideas because they're the most forceful of personalities. And that's because there's no the dominance of structurelessness was a problem then as a problem now of the way the movement organised. This is South London Gay Centre, by the way. Now they were very actually. There's Terry at the bottom there, Terry Street. Anyway, somebody I know. Don Milligan was in this as well. What was interesting in London when they first got involved in the mid-70s was the fact there were two gay groups in London. There was the South London gay group in Brixton, and there was East London Gay Centre, and they had very different approaches. The South London looked towards radical effeminacy and radical action, radical drag, and looked toward the feminist movement, as well as going to demonstrations. East London, they put themselves in Whitechapel, Redmond's Road in Whitechapel, which was then much a very, very run-down area. They linked themselves to the working class, and they saw themselves very much as to the trade union movement much more, and had an attempt to develop a Marxist analysis of it. And in fact, in 76, 77, as a gay collective cooperative, they voted as a group to join the SWP. I think to the whole of the local district at the time. And that's a sort of bit of history that you should be aware of, that there were these conflicts even then. So, what I want to go without in too much detail about that period, because I want to go into where queer politics and queer theory comes from, is that that period ended really by the late 70s. Defeats of the working class and the growth of, I suppose it was called at the time, the pink economy. Capitalism can oppress horribly, it can also absorb wonderfully. And there was a lot of absorption, respectability, and in the early days there were two organisations. There was the Gay Liberation Front, but there was also SHE, Campaign for Homosexual Equality, which I think still exists. And that summed up. One was for liberation, one was for equality. As Marsha P. Johnson once said when asked, so you're fighting for equality? And she said, no, I don't want the same shit as everybody else. I'm fighting for a revolution in the new world. SHE wanted the same shit as everybody else, which is what we've sort of more or less got, apart from Northern Ireland. There's always a clash between the respectables and the unrespectables, which is seen time and time again within the LGBT movement, with Stonewall often being the group Stonewall, ironically named after a riot of street people, being the most respectable of organisations, being horrified by the unrespectable people that sometimes turn up to its cold events. They're wanting to be part of the society as it is now, not a complete transformation of society. So that sort of whole project of the revolution it'll be next week or at least a month away, attitude did not work. And you saw then the collapse of the politics, the collapse of the movement. And in that period, you saw the domination of a couple of ideas inside the LGBT movement. And I suppose I've got to talk about Foucault here, and I guess later on Judith Butler. I'm not going to talk about Judith Butler very long, because it's Monday morning, and it's been a long weekend, and trying to talk about Judith Butler is like trying to wade through treacle. When she's talking about ordinary events, she's wonderful. When you get to her theory, I mean, I think to understand Judith Butler's ideas on gender is go and watch the film Some Like It Hot. That sums up entirely her ideas. And it's a much better way of presenting it. There you have two rampant heterosexual jazz musicians who have to, because they're running from the mob, pretend that they're women in an all-women's band. One of them gets into his performance, ends up marrying another man, or wanting to marry another man. And that's exactly what, Something Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe is a much better presentation of performance theory of Judith Butler, I think, the Judith Butler manages, and just watch that film, and that's her ideas. When he gets to Foucault, I think there's more problems with Foucault because there's more than one Foucault. There's the Foucault that was in France and what he did to the movement in the 70s. There's the Foucault when he came to Britain in the late 70s. And then there's the rediscovered Foucault in America in the 90s that gave birth to queer politics and we still is now fed back into Europe from America. Because I'm going to look at various books because there's been an attempt to reformat queer theory for the current period in the last 3 or 4 years. What a wonderful slogan that is.
So all that just for this bit. And from that, now we have the CFMEU campaigning for trans rights over women's rights. And, teaching the gender ideology in schools. See you later. Bye.